the 48 to 1871. So like I just said, we had kind of in our last literature, music, art, and followed those through. I think it's easier to learn something thematically, like what's going on in the social life, what's going on in the lives of women, than it is to say all of these are going on right here. So we are going to overlap just it. 1848, we're going back to right after the revolutions, the unsuccessful revolutions of 1848, except where? What was the exception on your exam? Greece. Very good. Except for Greece, who gained their independence, hearkening back to our unsuccessful revolutions, we are picking back up with France. So if you remember where we left off in France, we kind of left off where we had the building of those national workshops, and then the bourgeoisie government decided to take those away, and that caused riots. And what do the French people do when they riot? They build barricades. We had all this barricade building. We had all of this going on, riots in the street, bourgeoisie government, and then we're picking back up in November of 1848. So November 1848, we're going to talk about the time period known as the Second French Republic. A couple things I want you to take note of, and you might write out to the side here. What war did we just leave Britain from? For my lecture, my recording over the weekend. What? The Crimean War. And I had a nice little poem in there that I didn't read to you because you guys all know my poetry reading skills. The Light Brigade. And that was about the horrors of the British going into battle, okay, that their tactics weren't caught up with their technology. You might make a note here that we're going to see Great Britain kind of lose the stomach to fight during this time period. We are going to see Great Britain be kind of, I don't know, we can't use the word shell shock yet because the word shells. They have kind of lost that gut, like this horror. Remember the picture I showed you at the end of the Light Brigade, and like 600 rode in, and that small group is what rode out. They've kind of been like, maybe we'll back off this fighting right now. And so you might want to note that Great Britain isn't going to step in where it may have before. It isn't going to have the stomach to step in where it may have before. And spoiler alert, especially as we move towards Germany and Italy unifying. Where Britain may have stepped in before, they are not going to because of the Crimean War and some battlefield outcomes that they've had. They are not going to be as quick. We're also our sick man of Europe. If you remember from my video, who's the sick man of Europe? The Ottoman Empire. I like to think of the Ottoman Empire like right now, like you have like the oxygen tank behind, like just crippling along. And it kind of makes me sad because the Ottoman Empire has been like our security blanket this whole year. Like it's been like your constant. We've gone through all of these changes and all of these, and the Ottoman Empire's been hanging on for you. You're gonna have it. Don't worry. 50 more years.
Do you consider them Europeans though?
Do I?
Or you just always considered them?
No, I mean I consider kind of like the mushy point. I kind of feel like there's something we've always been able to talk about, and then this is what's kind of going on there, and we're going to lose that. In the next 50 years, which 50 years in here takes what? A day? In the next 50 years, we're going to see the Ottoman Empire blown away in World War I, okay? And that's what we're fastly approaching. So the sick man of Europe, kind of a big deal, as we've been talking about some of these other nations wanting to break free and gain their independence. So we're going to see the end of that. But that's all my background knowledge for you right there. Where we left off. Now we're into the Second French Republic, and where we had left off, there's a constitution. We saw that with the First French Republic. There's a legislature, which is called the National Assembly. Okay, so this is where we are. There's a strong executive power, which would have been called the president in France at this time, and you are popularly elected president of the republic. Remember, France at this time, we're going to see it go like this, so it's going to be like right here, universal male suffrage, then boop, and then back up. But at this time, there's universal male suffrage, so if you were the president, you were popularly elected, meaning all males, or the most males in the world, can vote at this time. So universal suffrage, only place in the world to have this. And so then we're going to have our presidential candidate. You've seen his picture multiple times. Like I was getting tired of this picture, and I had this thought, maybe I should go out and find a completely different picture of him. I was like, well, how confusing would that be if I show you the same picture of him every time and then I do a new pic up there? So same old, Louis Napoleon, the nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte, not a Bonaparte because Bonaparte still can no longer ever rule France again. But so we are going to have him elected. Remember, you'd be like, oh, what are those crazy people thinking? Like another Napoleon. He is seen, like after all this craziness and back and forth, as a symbol of security, as a symbol of greatness, as, a name recognition. If your first time to vote, and even, I'd hate to say it, a lot of adult voters go into their polling booth, they don't know a lot about the issues, and they vote on name recognition. Our whole country was developed by presidents whose names were recognized from the newspapers of war victories. It's called the bloody shirt vote. You voted for the guy who was most successful in battle, or you knew had a military campaign. Would they make the best leader all the time? No. But their name was recognizable. I mean, I don't even have to go into the bushes, right? Like name recognition there. Okay. Oh, great. That's how I'm going to have to edit that before my dad listens to this. All right. So, not allowed to make fun of the bushes in front of my dad. All right. So, where did I leave off? Oh, yeah. President Louis Napoleon, as you imagine, conservative kind of guy, right? He is like the age of Metternich. Quite not, nobody's as conservative as Metternich, but he's going to kind of stand for this conservatism. He is going to want to hearken back in the groups of people like the church, the army, property owners, business owners, the bourgeoisie. He wants to gather them under him. He wants to be popular with these guys, and that's going to play a big part in Louis Napoleon. So, a little background knowledge, he's lived most of his life outside of France, so his name was recognizable, although people didn't know a lot about him. I really wish I could say that elections ran any different today. I wish our voting public was a little more informed, but I'll have to depend on you guys for that. Change the way. So voters were perhaps swayed by the name recognition of the Napoleonic legend. So, Louis Napoleon, we have a universal suffrage. He wins 5.5 million to 1.5 million, so a pretty sweeping victory here. If you want to add that in, he wins 5.5 million to 1.5 million. So that's pretty impressive with as divided as we've seen France in the past. And you think about now we have all of these lower class, middle class, and upper class people allowed to vote. So why so many voters? Well, Louis Napoleon is going to very quickly start catering to the conservatives. He is going to, in return for their support, make some promises that he says he will complete, and does complete right after election, for the conservatives. Kind of like the scratch my back and I'll scratch your back. Does anybody remember one thing, and this is just picking, so if you don't have it, totally fine, but just seeing. What one thing the Constitution says this time that Napoleon might want changed, Louis Napoleon might want changed, that he's going to scratch the conservatives' backs to get what he wants. And this was just said it once, it was a very minuscule detail. If you're the ruler, what might be something about, if our president wanted to be in power for a really long time, what's the first thing about the Constitution he might want to change? The term limit. Okay, right now you can only have one term because the French are worried about someone having too much power for too long. So Louis Napoleon says, I want to change that rule. I want to be able to be elected again. I scratch your back, conservatives, you scratch mine. And so he wants a change to the Constitution so he can run again. And he is going to give then what are called the fallow laws. Right here, and I've listed them in your notes as well. And all of these favor conservatives. These are all of the concessions he's willing to make to conservatives in order to get their support to change the Constitution, because they are in charge of the National Assembly. Okay, they have the power to do this. So the first one is he's going to return control of the education to the church. Who had control of it now in France? If it wasn't the church, it was the government, the state. He's going to say, hey, church peeps, you want some power back? Take education back. He is going to give that back to the church. He's going to minimize the influence of the legislative assembly. That is the part of the National Assembly that has become more liberal. Remember, we had that rise in the First Republic. He is going to support policies favorable to the army. He is going to start to disenfranchise many poor people from voting. Because remember, these upper level conservatives like uppity ups would say the poor people are too dumb to vote. They don't need to have the vote. They're not going to vote for the right things. They're not going to vote for the things that we want to get done. And so he's going to start to disenfranchise or take away some of those votes. And so that's our dip in voting right here. He's also going to destroy the Democratic Socialist movement by jailing or exiling its leaders and closing down labor unions. So he starts to do things very quickly to benefit the conservatives to get what he wants. What Louis wants is a change to the Constitution, so he turns around, okay, you voted me in, I passed all these fallow laws for you. What he does is he turns around and he says, okay, time's up, like you scratch my back, I want the Constitution changed, and I kind of have a lot of personal debt, and I'd like you to take care of that. We know that the French people do not like to pay their rulers' debt, and nor do I believe that the conservatives were ever really going to do anything for Louis. They just wanted things changed for them. So the Legislative Assembly did not grant Louis either payment of his large personal debt or allowance for a second presidential term. They turn around like, nope, sorry, got what we wanted, not going to help you out. All they had to do was really change the Constitution for him, and he would have left them alone. That's all they had to do. And, I mean, really, if you think about it, he's done everything you wanted. Why not give him a second term? That's all they had to do. They do not do it. And so in response, Louis Napoleon is going to plot a coup to become emperor. So this is at the point where Louis Napoleon is pretty much like, screw you guys. I am going to change the Constitution on my own. I will try to be an emperor. I don't need a second presidential. I am going to do as a good Napoleon does, and I am going to become an emperor, an authoritarian. Okay? Yep. I mean, I don't know what they expected. I really don't. I mean, sometimes I just get to teach this part about French history. I'm just like, I don't know. I could rationalize it, but why try? Because there's not.
Napoleon was his uncle.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know. I guess they say hindsight's 20/20, but I don't know what the saying is in French. I don't know if they have one. So this is where we get to the Second Empire. And this is where we're going to get Emperor Napoleon III. Now, I've already told you he becomes emperor, so none of this should have been a surprise to you in this lecture. We're just telling you how it happened now, because I think last time that I touched on your notes, I was just like, boom, he became emperor. This is what I didn't go into detail because we didn't need to. Now we're going into detail. What's going on in France? So, Emperor Napoleon III, ticked off by the conservatives, didn't scratch his back, plans a coup, and it is successful in December of 1851, and he will take control of the government in this coup and become emperor the following year. So he becomes emperor in 1852. Okay, he's been planning and plotting since 1851. Takes him 1 year. He's able to take over the government in a coup. So he starts to unravel this nice little ball of twine that he's put together for the conservatives. He dismisses the assembly. He restores universal suffrage. He's going to let all of those poorer people vote again. So we're going to have universal suffrage in 1852. And because of this, the people are like, man, Louis Napoleon, still name recognition. He still hadn't done reforms that had ticked too many people off. He is showing that he is swinging to a more liberal side. So 92% of the people vote for him to have to be president for 10 years. So they vote to allow him to have that second term, and not just a second term, but a term of 10 years, 92%. This is how Napoleon III is going to happen. This is how we get emperor instead of just Louis Napoleon. France will be the only country again in Europe at this time to provide universal suffrage. So that's important. Where was I going to leave off? Oh, yep. And then in 1853, 97% of voters agreed to make him a hereditary emperor. What does that mean if you're a hereditary emperor now?
Your sons take power.
Yeah, not only can you be president for 10 years and now you're emperor, your kids and their kids and their kids are going to be the rulers in line. So, I mean, I'm telling you, the French, I don't know. So, they make him a hereditary emperor. Okay, they're going to allow his children after him to take the throne. His kid will be the heir. So now 1851 to 1859, Napoleon III's control will be direct and authoritarian. Does that sound like anybody else we know? Maybe somebody with the same name? Yeah. Direct and authoritarian. However, you might want to note here, after authoritarian, you might want to write in, it is successful for France. So 1851 to 1859, he's actually a very successful authoritarian direct ruler. You know, I hate sometimes the authoritarian is only applied to negative rulers, and then maybe that's because those that get too much power end up abusing it in some way, or their people end up not liking them. But authoritarian can just mean that you take firm control of the government and you do with it as you see fit. And it just so happens that Napoleon from 1851 to 1859 does what's good for France. It's successful here. So, how is it successful? Number one, he strengthened the centralized power. He again returns centralized power to France. An imperial aristocracy will emerge consisting of wealthy businessmen. We'll see the censorship of the press. And if you remember, it wasn't long ago we were talking about how out of hand the press got, especially under Marat during the French Revolution. And so we're going to see that censorship is kind of necessary in certain terms here to help France be stable. The government will sponsor official candidates in elections, which means he picks who he wants running. Not very democratic. He's like, you're okay to run, you're okay, you're an official candidate. So you really don't run with any opposition. And then 1859 to 1870, Napoleon will set out to build the liberal empire. So your QD for today, if you want to kind of take note to answer on the side here. Napoleon III will then set out to build the liberal empire by initiating a series of reforms. And so he's very much conservative. The conservatives kind of do him dirty. He is going to start some liberal reforms because he realized it's the liberal public that put him into his position, that allowed him to be emperor, that made him hereditary emperor. And so he starts what is known as the liberal empire. You want to write out to the side, too. Other countries are going to see this, and they are going to go, that works. And we're going to start to have, for one of the first times we get to talk about, when France sneezes, it's a good thing that the rest of Europe catches a cold. Because the rest of Europe are going to look at some of these reforms and start to change as well. They're going to start to use nationalism to make them support an authoritarian. So they're going to start to say, Louis Napoleon is France. Louis Napoleon has the best parts of France. Louis Napoleon, he identifies with this. And so they're going to start to use nationalism, these liberals, to build an authoritarian government. And,
Like the Sun King.
yeah, kind of like I am the state. So first thing we're going to talk about is going to be economy. But again, you might want to circle there at the bottom. Napoleon III's rule will provide a model for other political leaders in Europe. And what kind of leader is he? Authoritarian. Okay, he's going to start to set this model. I'm sure you can think of a couple authoritarian rulers that are going to be coming up as we edge towards World War I. World War II. He demonstrated how government could reconcile popular and conservative forces through authoritarian nationalism. Circle authoritarian nationalism. This is where we're going to see this start to be used. So he's going to start to say, hey, maybe you don't have to be all conservative or all liberal. Maybe you just need to be nationalistic, and your authoritarian ruler needs to represent, the nation. All right, so first, economy. Economic reforms are going to result in a healthy economy for France. Like I said, Napoleon's a good thing for France at this time. We've already talked about a lot of this. We get infrastructure, we get roads, we get canals, we get wide boulevards, all of these things under Baron Georges von Haussmann that we talked about in chapter 14. When we discussed the widening of the boulevards and cleaning up the streets and all of that city planning. That happens under Napoleon III. We're going to see the movement towards free trade. French exports are going to double. This is probably or perhaps the first time that any modern state had played such a direct role in stimulating the economy. So we're going to see the economy flourish under Napoleon III. This is where you get the Credit Mobilier, which is the bank, the central bank of France. It's going to fund all this industrial and infrastructure growth. Does anybody remember this bank from U.S. history? And then I think I previewed a little bit with you from another lecture. It's actually going to be a scandal, this bank, U.S. in the United States, the Credit Mobilier. But it's going to help France. So I didn't know if you guys remember this. Probably on the AP US exam, I would almost bet. somewhere. But it's going to end up being a scandal within the United States as you get to U.S. history and the French, but as it pertains to us, not so much. What it means to us is free trade for France. Okay, it's going to help with their investment, with their infrastructure. We're going to see that France's metallurgical industry will rival Britain's, so that's a pretty big deal. Remember, Britain's kind of like, oh man, we spent all our money in the first industrial revolution. And now all these people that have this new money are moving forward faster than Britain. We're going to see French investors financing large infrastructure projects in Russia, Spain, and Italy. And one of these huge infrastructure projects, circle this, the Suez Canal in Egypt is completed in 1869. So this is a biggie right here. Number 2 is political reforms. It's number 3 on your packet, I'm sorry. Number 3, political reforms. He's now going to give some back. He is going to give back to the people that supported him. Okay, the conservatives not supported him so much, so he's going to start to shift to the other side. He is going to extend the power of the legislative assembly. He is going to allow members to be elected by universal suffrage, so he's still allowing everyone to vote, be elected every 6 years. He's going to allow for opposition candidates. I mean, can you imagine? He's going to allow people to run against the people he selected. So we get that here. He is going to return control of secondary education to the government instead of the church. So he starts to really unwind all of those provisions he'd done for conservatives. He's like, haha, and now education goes back to the state. In response to this, you remember Pope Pius IX, and we talked about the syllabus of errors. We've talked about it twice. Here we get to mention it again because this is an overlap section. He gives the syllabus of errors in response to Louis Napoleon giving the schools back to the French state. So this is where the Pope goes, oh no, things are going too far, and he gives us the syllabus of errors. And I could put the syllabus of errors up here for you. It's incredibly long, even when it's translated from Latin. Pretty much it's a syllabus of like your class syllabus of like what not to do. Don't be liberal. If you think that reason is the answer to all things, you are wrong. If you think that nationalism is the best course, you are wrong. If you think the Pope doesn't have authority over the church, you are wrong. It's a list of what you're wrong about if you don't agree with the church. So we got that syllabus of errors, condemns liberalism. Anything liberal is not with the church. Remember, the church would be on the conservative side. Louis is going to permit trade unions and their right to strike. So this is a big deal. We haven't seen that. We got rid of those workshops. We got rid of all of that worker support. He's going to ease censorship and grant amnesty to political prisoners. He's going to support better housing. So remember, he had to tear down a lot of those slums to widen the boulevards. And so if you think about it now, this is kind of ironic because where do rich people live now? Do they live like in the city? Like downtown in the city? Where do they live? In the suburbs. Yeah, they're like, oh, get me up out of there. In France at this time, actually, it's, the wealthy are going to be living like right in the city, and all the slums got torn down to make the boulevards wider, and they're actually living outside of the city. So it's kind of ironic. That's how things are going at this time. But there will be better housing for the poor. They build them on the outskirts of Paris. He supports credit unions and regulation of pawn shops. That's just a little odd one. So some more economy in there. Now, foreign policy, circle the word struggles. This is where Louis Napoleon's going to run into problems. His foreign policy is not going to be good. Internal policy, good. Other people are looking to him and saying, wow, this is how an authoritarian government should be set up. Foreign policy, Napoleons have problems with foreign policy. Like they just have, like they should just have stayed in like France. Just be worried with your own peeps. Anyway, so foreign policy is going to lead in strong criticism of Napoleon III and demonstrate his weakness as a ruler. Everything about Louis Napoleon that is weak is going to be demonstrated by his foreign policy. We're going to see that Italy will be allowed to become a nation in a second, and we're going to see what effect this has. I hate to keep throwing that out there and spoil it for you, but Italy, Germany, they're coming. So what happens, why Italy's even involved right here, is Napoleon sent French troops to Italy to rescue and restore Pope Pius IX. Even though Louis is liberal. He is still very much Catholic, and France is still very much Catholic. And so when Italy is trying to unify and we're having all of these invasions, he is going to send troops in from France to rescue and restore Pope Pius IX, and they are going to stay there from 1849 to 1870. This act is condemned by Republicans, though supported by conservatives and moderates. So he is now supported for this act by the conservatives, of whom he doesn't get along with anymore. And now his new populists, the liberals, are really upset with him for stepping in to save the Pope. Okay? And so he splits his people right here. French involvement in the Crimean War that you listened to over the weekend will anger Republicans and liberals, although much of Europe saw Napoleon III as the victor in the war. So he's going to anger the Republicans and the liberals here by his aid in the Crimean War. We're going to see the issue of colonialism in Algeria and other colonies in Africa. So we're going to see a divide. You guys learned about this in U.S. history, right, too? Pro-colonialists, anti-colonialists, anti-imperialists, and imperialists. People disagree over whether it's right or wrong. And so Napoleon's got his stake in Indochina and Mexico, and these are going to become contentious political issues with the anti-imperialists. Just to give you a reference of time, this time of colonialism with France and Mexico is the time of Cinco de Mayo. So just to give you that frame of reference there, I'm sure you will get there. We'll get there. So Napoleon's liberal reforms were done in part to divert attention from his unsuccessful foreign policy. Highlight that, circle that. So why would a conservative like Napoleon, Louis Napoleon, this isn't the only reason. We talked about other reasons. The conservatives didn't scratch his back. The liberals, by allowing them to vote and having universal suffrage, he was able to get what he wanted, a change to the Constitution and hereditary emperorship. But Napoleon's liberal reforms were partly done, I'd say more mainly. He was kicked at the conservatives, but his foreign policy was not popular, and it was like they're like magicians. Like, look at this hand while I'm doing this with the other hand. It was to distract from his unsuccessful foreign policies. And so then the next thing that's going to happen regarding Napoleon III is going to end with his demise, and I was like, I'm dead, but with his capture, with his end of reign, is going to be when Germany becomes a nation. And this is going to be in the Franco-Prussian War of 1870 to 71, in which Napoleon III will be captured, and this results in the collapse of the Second French Empire that he built. And so his foreign policies will be his demise. It'd also be the demise of the Second Republic. But his foreign policy is one of the reasons that we get the liberal empire, which is going to set the rest of Europe up to say, hey, what about this authoritarian leader thing? What's that about? How does that work? It can be successful internally. Okay? And that is where we're going to leave off, because we're just focusing on France today. We're going to pick up with, spoiler alert, I've spoiled it for you already, the unification of Italy and Germany. And so I'm pretty sure you can see where that's leading as we move towards World War I. And the problems that are going to start to be caused by our isms, nationalism, alliances, imperialism, militarism, all of those things. So that's the end of part 2. If you want to write part 3 at Italian unification, that is where we will pick up next time.